Mm,
We are officially live, waiting for our first live viewers, but we are here.
we are here with a big 0 up in the corner. Ain't nobody showing up for this.
Where are they going to show up first? Is it going to be Facebook? Facebook. Oh, Brian
Nice.
Trussinger. Come on, man.
Oh, at least we got our staff here. That's good.
Yeah, it'll
Where's
probably
Doreen? She
be
always
Brian and my
Doreen.
brother.
Yeah,
My brother.
Doreen always pops in first right off the bat. She's got to be one of these 4, right?
Well, we have somehow a like on YouTube, but no viewers, so I'm not sure how that works.
All right.
But it seems to be going out anyway.
Oh, Bryans. The Bryans. This is the Bryans night. Hi from Minnesota. Ms. That's a great name. Ms. I don't know if that's just a handle, but Ms. Bollywood. That's fantastic. Ms. LaFontaine Bollywood. I'm having all of that. All right. We got some people that are here, so we might as well get started for all the people that are going to watch this on playback. Let's see here. We got all kinds of fun things tonight. We're going to introduce all the faces on the screen. You know 2 of them. We're going to introduce the 3rd one. But before we do that, we got to go over our details. What do we got? We got our next Q&A. We're not going to do a live stream in December. I got eye surgery coming up. It's Christmas. It's the holidays. We're going to take a break, everybody. That's what we're going to do. So no live stream in December. We'll be back in January. January 8th. It's a Wednesday, to be exact. January 8th, 5 p.m. Pacific time, 8 p.m. Eastern time. We will be back in January. And every now and then we get some things wrong. Like I missed our messenger newsletter went out and said that this live stream was 2 nights ago. But that obviously was wrong. Here we are. So if you're ever curious or if you ever want to double check a time, a date, jump on that website, right, Brent? That's going to be your best. If we make a mistake, we can't go back and undo the messenger, but we can update the website immediately.
I think the website was already right. We just we had the old date in the newsletter, and that was made before it went out, and just nobody caught it.
Yep, absolutely. All right, well, we got all 3 platforms going tonight, Brent. We got YouTube, Facebook, Twitter.
They're all going. I haven't seen any comments coming in from Twitter, but it says we have viewers. So,
all right, we had a lot of chatter coming across my desktop, my dashboard, asking about Threads, Blue Sky. I'm thinking I may wander over to those platforms here in the next month or 2, maybe over the holiday break. And then I'll let the team decide if we want to open up a little. Seems like more and more people are showing up over there for different reasons. So anyway,
we'll talk about the options for that.
Yeah, we'll do that. So
I'm going to put that in our meeting agenda right now.
Oh, don't tell Brian. He's watching. Let's see here. What else do we do? We do these live streams. We love questions. Tonight's live stream is something special, though. Like we usually just take kind of any and all questions. Questions get emailed in. Live questions. We just love questions. We want to encourage questions. We want to encourage people to ask them. We want to encourage people to listen to questions, to receive questions well, to respond to them as like the gift that they are when somebody else takes the plunge and is vulnerable enough to offer questions up. Like live stream is a lot of it is just teaching us how to interact with questions on both sides of the conversation and know that they're not a bad thing. And it's a large part of what we do. Tonight we have something special. I have been stockpiling chiasm questions as they come in. We don't get like a ton, but we had a handful over the course of the last year. And I thought, well, that would be a fun live stream in and of itself, a special chiasm live stream edition. And I even knew when I had that idea who I was going to ask to come be with us. And for those of you that made it to session 6, you've already met this guy, Brian David. He's with us tonight. He's in episode 306. We end up in season 6 going through John verse by verse. And at the end of that whole series, takes us almost a whole year to do it. So for all of you that stopped at session 5 and then went back and started over without listening in real time, you've made a horrible error. And you need to keep listening. We get to the end of that series and we talk to scholar Dr. Gary Burge. And then the next episode, we talk to raw scholar Brian David. And a PhD from the School of Hard Knocks, if I do say so myself. But he's on there, and Brian's been with Bema early, and he's had some incredible groups in California that he's helped lead. But Brian loves chiasms, and Brian will jump on the chiasm train quicker than I do. He'll ride the train longer than I do. Like, I'll always be like, I don't really know if there's a chiasm here. And Brian's like, well, you're not trying hard enough. Here's what I found. And he loves it. So when I thought chiasm special edition live stream, I was like, I bet Brian will join us. So Brian's not a part necessarily of the teaching team, but a really good close friend. Puts out some great stuff. His Bema groups are top notch, and he's with us tonight. So we're still going to sprinkle in some live questions. I'm still going to do a rapid fire response section tonight. So for all of you worrying how far upstream we're going to wander, we still got some of those good old elements that everybody looks for. But we're going to work on some chiasms tonight. That's what we're going to do. Brian, introduce yourself. Tell us more about you. Just tell us about yourself.
Yeah, well, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me. I've been to Turkey with a trip with Marty, and we go back to 2013, I believe. And I asked him if I could sneak into his stuff he was doing at college. And he was graceful enough to let me do that, and got me super excited about engaging the text. And the more I learned, the more I heard, and just got connected with chiasms. And for whatever reason, I seem to hear them, notice them more. The way I read now, the way I engage, the way I play fast and loose. I listen to Dr. Kenneth Bailey and Richard Bauckham and Rabbi David Foreman and hear what they have to say about how chiasms interact. But basically, I've landed on this is a really, really common literary structure that was used throughout the age, throughout all kinds of literature, from Virgil to Homer to the philosophers, all those guys at that time. And if it's common, if it's there, then it might have something for us to say in here. And it just became more and more engaging to me over the last few years. And it's been fun and educational. And I feel like there's more to say to us if we can engage it. So that's where I'm coming from.
If we have ears to hear. I love it. Yeah. And Brian's proven that to me over time. I'll make a quick judgment call, and Brian will whip open some Google Doc somewhere that's got all these color codes. You'll probably see some of that even tonight, and go, actually, check this out. And I'll be like, oh my goodness, look at that. There it was. So do love it. All right. So with that, I'm going to dive right in. We don't got time to waste. That's one of the hallmarks of our live streams, is I'm always running behind. So our first one comes from Nicole. I've got some thoughts on this, Brian, but I'm going to read this. I'm going to toss it to you first. In our Sunday school class, Nicole says, they're discussing Mark. The guy facilitating the conversation asked us if there might be a chiasmus in the first chapter, which discusses the baptism of Jesus, Mark 1. It was the first time in our class that we dove into finding the gems and not just reading the words, which just the fact that somebody would ask that question and you get to have that experience is fantastic. And I love that. And that is so encouraging, both for me to hear, but I'm sure it was for you to experience that in your class. But when you've looked at Mark 1, Brian, what are some of the things that you see? What are some of your thoughts when you saw Nicole's question here?
Yeah, so I didn't really find a clear chiasm. What I do feel like is there is in my, I don't know if you can, it's my handy dandy chiasm generator here. I don't know if it's, um, the, is a series of parallelisms. Somebody goes someplace, somebody does something, and people respond as a result. And you'll see that like in verse 4, John Baptist appeared in the wilderness preaching a baptism. Verse 9, at that time, Jesus came from Nazareth and was baptized by John. Verse 14, after John was put in prison, Jesus went into Galilee. And there's a pattern. And each one, there's a response. Something happens after someone shows up, and then there's a response, and then there's a, there's a response. And like it's a 3-level parallelism, kind of all the way down, almost all the way through the whole chapter, I believe. So that's what I saw. And then each of those parallelisms will typically, you can line those up and often get some meaning out of how those parallelisms work together, would be how I would approach it. But I didn't see a specific chiasm there, I don't think.
Yeah, the parallelism is great, and parallelism is going to be a cousin of chiasm. Like when we say chiasm, a lot of times what we and particularly mean is an inverted parallelism. And some of those don't even have a center. I think when we originally recorded Bema, we kind of oversimplified things for the learning process. Sometimes inverted parallelisms are the parts are talking to each other. And there's not necessarily a centerpiece that's at the center, but part A is talking and part B is talking and A, B, C, D ends up having a conversation as you follow it through. Sometimes there is an inverted parallel, and we at Bema we love to point the ones that have a center out with a treasure in the middle. Those are some of our most favorite. But parallelisms in general are going to be a close cousin to chiasmus, inverted parallelism, and Mark is definitely employing that. And I think what Brian pointed out just follows his whole gospel all the way through. Like he keeps employing this rhetoric, this rhetorical tool over and over and over again. And it's not so much in a chiastic structure, but it is this parallel bang, 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 bang. You get this cadence as you're going through Mark for his Roman audience. And that's what I think I see. I also think when you're dealing with Mark more than any other gospel, and maybe even more than other letters in your New Testament, seems to utilize inclusio, which is often, it feels like chiasm. So there is an inclusio for the whole Gospel of Mark. I can't remember if Thomas Schmidt also was the one who did. Thomas Schmidt was the one that did the work we talk about in the episode on Mark about the coronation. And he was a Mark scholar, and my brain's telling me he also did work on inclusio. And he noted 7 different elements that form the inclusio from Mark 1 to Mark 14, 15, 16. And so there's that. And oftentimes people will mistake inclusio for a chiasm. They can be, like an inclusio can also be a chiasm, but inclusio is a Greek literary tool, literary device, that is basically giving you bookends, and there doesn't have to be an inverted there doesn't have to be parts talking to each other. It's an argument that's contained within the brackets. And that argument is essential for understanding everything else that's happening. So when we go through Hebrews, I think our first episode of 2 on the book of Hebrews in session 4, we talk about an inclusio in the book of Hebrews. It's probably the easiest one to see. Mark is hard because it's the whole thing. It's the whole gospel. But anyway, so I say that, Nicole, just to say there's a lot of things going on here. And even though we don't necessarily see a chiasm, probably more of a repetition, more of a rhetorical device, a rhetorical tool, that doesn't mean you're not barking up the right tree and right in the right neighborhood, because the tools that are at use here are very, very close cousins. It's probably a Greek audience, a Greco-Roman audience. I'm not sure if the author is Greco-Roman or Jewish, but employing tools that are more familiar to them as a Greco-Roman reader than others. But there you go, Nicole. Anything else that you would add, Brian, before we move on to the next one?
Yeah, just keep up the good work. If you're hearing or seeing or engaging any of that stuff, God bless you. Keep working. Keep doing it, because that's how it happens. That's how we learn. And hopefully, we'll get a chance to talk about the inclusio of Romans tonight, because it's it's a big one. And there are things like confirmed by folks like Foreman and Bailey, I think, that you can have chiasms within a inclusio. You can
Yes.
have chiasms within a chiasm.
Yep.
Okay, so that they can be pieces too. You can have two different chiasms can be the the e's and the e's on either side of the x that's in the middle, and they can all work together in multiple ways. Because remember, these are things that are trying to help folks that hearing the text often more than reading it and putting things together, and that's why you hear repetition, and that's how these parallelisms and chiasms work together to help folks get meaning is hopefully the target. So keep up the good work.
Absolutely. That's what this is all about. All right, I've got a message from April. No, sorry, from the month of April, from a listener named, I'm gonna butcher this. I wish I could say this with the proper accent, but Romulo. Brent, do you think I did that right? Romulo? I'm hoping.
I mean, probably. I am unfortunately not familiar with Portuguese and what the different marks mean. So I don't know if it's supposed to be O or ah or ooh. I have no idea. Sorry.
Well, I'm going to call you R Money, and I'm going to say, just know that I care, and it matters to me. I love people's names. Part of my greatest joy on these book tour events is getting to meet so many people and sign books, and I get to ask them their name, and I get to hear the coolest names, like the coolest names.
Mm-hmm.
All right, I'm jumping over to his question. The question here says, I'm from Brazil and have just listened to episode 7, where Martin, thanks for using it's actually not my real official name, but I love it when it comes from anybody from South America. I'm going to take it. Marty talks about the big chiasm from Genesis 1 through chapter 11. It was said that the center of that chiasm is Genesis 5, 28 through 29. I couldn't help but notice that in 531, Noah lived 777 years, which we're going to talk about that here in just a moment. 7 is the fullness number, completeness. Yes, absolutely. What does it mean here? And does the center of this chiasm point to Jesus, that he was the true Noah that trusted God and brought rest for us? So a few different questions in there. First one is the reference to Noah living 777 years. And I think you just mistyped the name there, because it's actually Lamech. Lamech that lives 777 years. And he's the father of Noah. Do I have that right, Brian? Yeah. What do you see? What do you see in here with this question, Brian? Anything you see?
Not so much. I haven't really found a chiasm within chapter 5 necessarily itself. Obviously, genealogies have their own places and purposes and meanings and those kind of things, but the 7s play really nicely here with shalom or rest or completeness, wholeness. So, I mean, I would definitely make those kind of connections and then see where else they would play.
Yep. So the whole reference to Lamech in general is very, very interesting, because there's a Lamech that shows up in both genealogies, both lines. The line of Cain, and then a Lamech that shows up in the line of Seth, who would be the father of Noah. And there's a lot of Jewish midrash. One Jewish midrash claims that it's a crossover. It ends up being the same guy that crosses over into both family lines. It's a crazy midrash. Most midrash doesn't do that. It's just interesting that they both end up in the lines. And are they both the 7th generation down? I'd have to go back and check. But you have the 7th generation. You have 777. Like all of that numerology that you're thinking. Romulo is totally. Yeah, and I would assume that has to be, there has to be some treasure buried there. That there's something about what Noah, like if I were to dip my toe in the allegorical stream just a little bit, I would say I feel like it's trying to say that there's something about shalom, fullness, completion, the completion of righteousness that ends up giving birth to Noah and this hero that's going to give us comfort and rest. So I feel like that plays nicely. I don't go too far down the allegorical stream because that's outside my wheelhouse. I know a lot of allegorical Hellenistic Judaism, eventually Jewish mysticism, but before that, just even in the first century, guys like Philo were Jewish thinkers that were far more Hellenistic from the school of Alexandria, far more allegorical. They would have made huge deals about numbers like this. So you are not alone in noticing that. As far as your other question about does the center of this chiasm point to Jesus? Anybody that hangs out with me long enough knows that I always try to resist the urge to say that something's pointing forward to Jesus and instead be amazed that Jesus points backwards to the story. As a Jewish reader, that's just preferred for me. The leaping forward to Jesus often unintentionally feels to a Jewish hearer like it invalidates the story, like everything was only purposeful because it points forward and we're just skipping all the other story. We're skipping. So the reason why I always like to say, as a Jewish listener, thinking about my Jewish brothers and sisters, I always have to point backwards, because what that does is it means that Jesus is validating the story that's got us here, rather than the story pointing towards Jesus and kind of being meaningless and empty without him. It means that Jesus shows up and says that story was worth every page, worth every life, worth every walk of obedience, worth every path. And here I am to show you what it looks like perfectly. So that's what I'd say about the whole Jesus thing. Yes, Doreen put a comment in there. Foreman talks about this verse in his Parashah Companion. He does. He also has some teachings. I don't know where they're at in Aleph Beta. Like when I listened to Foreman, it was years ago, and stuff has come and gone. Some of his stuff has been made better. Who even knows? But I remember Foreman talking at length about the Midrash surrounding Noah and how he made the plow. And the Midrash, he's the one that invented the plow. And he was doing that to give comfort in our labor. He was trying to make our toil easier. And if I understand it correctly, the Midrash says it backfired. Because of that, we actually took labor, and I could be butchering that Midrash, so be careful before you quote me. But are you familiar with that Midrash at all, Brian?
I am a little, but not to be able to speak to it too much.
Yeah, I was trying to backpedal out of that and say, let's see if Brian knows anything.
Sorry.
Yeah, there's something out there, everybody. Go dig it up and find it. Safaria, go find it on Aleph Beta, but there is some good stuff there, and Doreen is totally right about that. Brian, I think you even have a document we might screen share. You had a Noah chiasm discussion with you, right?
I do.
Should we pull it? This is a great time. It's a great segue.
Sure.
Let's do the Noah chiasm while we're here.
I mean, the good thing about it is it feeds into a lot of the other ones. And one thing just about what the comment from Romulo, I think too about the Jesus thing, like the story is moving forward towards that. Like we're going to see, in Exodus, Yah's going to say, my presence will go with you and I will give you rest. And then we're going to see Jesus say,
Yes.
Come to me, all you are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Like all those things do connect in some ways, both ways. Like it's,
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like that's as far as that goes. But Noah, yeah, the chiasm in Noah. Do we have that? Do we have that?
We're on.
There it is.
This is not necessarily going to be a great experience for anybody watching on a phone, but
sorry,
you'll get the idea.
Yeah, there's a super. Let me find it on mine so I can point to it appropriately, speak to it. I don't know where'd I put it. Oh yeah, there it is. Okay. So there's a super famous, like it's all over the place. Like if you Google or search, if you're not a Google person, whatever, AI, the the great chiasm of the Noah flood story. You'll find that all over. I mean, folks like gotquestions.org and like everybody's got that chiasm. Okay. But I think there's more to the story because everyone has the same chiasm. It's basically actually starts usually in chapter 6, verse 10, Noah, and it goes through the sons and the ark, and there's a flood and a covenant, and then it does go through the numbers, which I know Rabs and Brenda talked about on the podcast in their episode. So you got the 7, 40, 150 days, and then coming back out the other side, you have, and I just did blah blah blah, 150, 40, 7, come out the back way, and it just reverses out, and that's the standard chiasm that's out there. What they miss, I think, and what I think speaks to a really good friend of mine that wrote a book about asking better questions. Okay. Yeah, he's actually on this he's actually on this live stream right now. But we need to go farther back. And if we look at Genesis 6, 5 through 7 is where the front part of the chiasm, I believe, should really start. Okay? Because what it's going to talk about there is this evil inclination, the Yetzer Hara. If I'm saying that, I might be saying that. Mari can say it better. And then it's going to, so that connects. The Yetzer Hara comes in front of, and it says the Yetzer Hara, and then God's speaking that I'm going to wipe everything out, right? I'm going to deconstruct. I'm going to decreate everything because of this Yetzer Hara. That's apparently, which is the wickedness, right? This is all in 6:5 through 7. And then if we turn to 8:21-ish, okay, on the backside of the flood, in the beginning of the rescue, and God's going to say, even though Yetzer Hara, okay, even though we have this evil inclination, as long as the earth endures, I will never again destroy. So God starts with Yetzer Hara, I'm going to destroy. He throws in this in 8:21, and then the rest of that finishes, and that's the bottom little piece of that, where I redid the chiasm there a little bit. And now it's, and this is allowable in Foreman's universe of chiasms, where if you things that might connect, but they're not in the exact order, you just make it bigger, and then they will still connect on both sides if you include more. Okay, that's totally legitimate with Foreman. And I think actually I've seen Bailey do it too. Okay, possibly in the Luke chiasm. Okay, so then you have a picture of, and I also have a little bit of inkling with the sinner, not inkling, what's the word? Thoughts, contemplation about the sinner, because everyone puts the sinner as God remembers Noah. Great, but it's not like God forgot Noah, or like he's the only one that's on a boat in the water, right? So there's no. It's the rest of that verse, which is actually the ruach over the eretz, the land and the water and the animals and its new creation. Like this is a direct link back to the first creation. Okay, so the sinner is, you have bookends that are Yetzer Hara, I'm going to destroy. Yetzer Hara, I'm never going to destroy again. And then we have new creation in the center. Here's the way I see it, which begs, for me, the question, what did the flood really accomplish? Humans had Yetzer Hara. God said, I'm wiping them out. All done, new creations. Humans still have Yetzer Hara, and God says, I'm never going to wipe them out. So what did the flood really accomplish? Is my question.
Well, I like that question, and I'm hoping that you have an answer.
My answer is purely heretical, I'm sure.
It's asking better questions of the Bible, not finding better answers in the Bible.
Exactly right. Yeah, so I've been in discussion with a couple of folks about the whole idea of tests. From I think the garden was the first test. I think Noah was a test. Um, Abraham
Yep.
obviously was a test. All these tests. I think the Exodus story going up the mountain was a test. These are all tests. Okay.
Yep. Yep.
And so uh, it's come up in kind of some of the Jesus God goggle kind of thing.
Yep.
Like, I'm working on a theory that basically God is learning what humans need to walk and flourish and rule with Him.
Yeah.
I don't know when I say God is learning, but it's expressed that way.
Right.
As what do you need? So they
Yep.
wouldn't go up the mountain. So what do you need? You need more instruction and you need a place where you think it's safe for us to meet. So he starts to give them Torah and a tabernacle.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
It's in that theme kind of all the way through where it's not like God doesn't know, but it's presented as what do you humans need to walk with me? It didn't happen in the
Yeah.
garden. There is this Yetzer Hara. Actually, there's a tree of Tov and Ra in chapter 2 before the garden ever shows up. So there is
Yeah.
Ra that
Yeah.
exists.
And those are
And
the same. Those are the same elements, Brian, that will keep showing up. Like God keeps making those same, and it keeps progressing. So if I take this idea that these are tests, and again, these aren't pass-fail tests. These are God meeting us where we're at, seeing our heart. So he goes to Noah. I'm going to destroy the whole world. No pushback from Noah. None. Like, when do I need to have the boat done? And so, okay, I love your question about what does the flood accomplish? Because on one hand, I think one way to answer it is nothing. Like, judgment and wrath really doesn't accomplish a whole lot. It's what I'm trying to teach you. It's what I'm trying to experience myself. Next time we see a similar thing, God shows up to Abraham. I'm going to destroy a whole city. Abraham's like, you can't do that. Argues with God. Still doesn't argue to its logical end. Like, stops at 10 people. Doesn't push all the way through. And every time God will basically create a covenant, a law, something to follow, and a space of some kind. So ark, covenant, circumcision, covenant, that kind of thing. Then you're going to have Moses, who will, in a lot of ways, embody, not perfectly, not like Jesus, but will embody, no, you actually destroy me, don't destroy them. Like, we are watching the people of God. And what does he give them? He gives them a covenant and a literal place, a tabernacle. We have an ark again. We have like all these same elements that you've pointed out. I think that tracks through. Very Jonathan Sacks. Like, I hear Jonathan Sacks talk about those same things and what God's doing in Torah quite a bit. So I love that. I think you're spot on. Boom.
amen. That's why I called it the better question Noah chiasm. So
Dude, somebody ought to write a book about that. All right. Well, I love it. All right. I'm going back to my document. Here we go. Oh, Dylan asked this question. True or false, all chiasms. This is a good question, Dylan. I'm going to see what Brian says, because I have wrestled with this question and I don't know. I don't know. There's an academic objective part of me that wants to say true. And there's a spirit-filled, what do I know? God's always up to something in the middle part of me that's like false. But here's what Dylan says. True or false, all chiasms are intentional by the author and or redactor putting the story together. I mean, All of them, generally most of them, I want to assume that as a work of hermeneutics, but all of them, no way. I just see too much. Like when Foreman does his Genesis 1 through 11, multiple chiasms forming a larger chiasm. And Foreman believes there's one author. I believe there's multiple authors. Well, I don't think that's just incredible. I'm not saying it's impossible for humans to do. I feel like that's God. The fingerprints of God are all over that stuff. So I don't know. I lean towards false when I'm sticking to the all chiasms. Most chiasms, I'm probably going to say, as just a work of objective hermeneutics, I'm going to try to lean towards true as much as I can. But ultimately, false for me. Brian, what do you think?
I'm pretty much with you. I feel like from just wrestling with it for the last 5 years or so, that it definitely is a collaboration.
Oh,
That
good word. Good word.
Yeah, I mean, when you see, and I think we can all, well, I don't know, I won't say that. There are certain things that appear to be out of chronological order in the text. Can we agree with that? Like,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and a lot of times I have seen those like make the chiasm work better or
Yeah.
more completely. So is that the author? On the other hand, like I'm going to say, and again, this is totally me, and this is all caveat emptor, and your mileage may vary in general, but I think there's like 30 to 40 something chiasms in the book of Romans. Okay. And, but do I think Paul and his team, like, well, let's put this here to make the chiasm? Absolutely not. I have full belief, confidence, love that the Holy Spirit just made that happen because God knew that's how people could hear and learn the best way at that time. Like, I think it's all works together.
Yeah.
I don't want
Yeah.
to. I think it's all those.
Yep. Yeah, I'm with you. All right, there we go. All right, let's do one more chiasm before rapid fire response. We've got a live question that's come in from a good friend. Oh, I love that. But let's do a chiasm first. Our last chiasm on the front half of this live stream, whatever we're calling this thing. Kathleen says this. Yesterday, I was teaching a faith basics class. We were doing a close reading of Matthew 3 to teach them to look for narrative details. And I got overexcited and taught them about chiasms. I do the same thing, Kathleen. I get too excited. I'm like, you guys have got to know about chiasmus. And I'm only there for like one day, and all I do is like screw people up. I'm totally with you. I'm sure I sounded a little crazy. It's a good crazy. It's good crazy, Kathleen. Join the party. When we went back to the text, I started reading and was like, the word voice is at the beginning and end of this. And within 3 minutes, I saw voice of Isaiah, baptisms of the people, dispute between John and the Pharisees, judgment image, verse 11, judgment image, dispute between John and Jesus, baptism of Jesus, voice of God. And it was my first time just catching one of my own while I was just reading it, and it was a total thrill. I had also enough confidence to present them with all this judgment imagery and ask, was John necessarily right about how this was going to go down, which probably cracked open the minds of the 20 people I was teaching forever. So point being, thank you for your work. Your love of the text is infectious. No actual question, but I put this in here when we got the email because I was like, yes, this is somebody doing it. Like this is like who Brian was, whatever, 10 years ago. I don't know if you had heard about chiasms before, Bema, who knows? But like, this is where it starts for us. And I can remember, Foreman was the one that I had heard about a chiasm before in my training, but nobody had. We had spent zero time in Bible college or anything like that with that. But I had heard of the concept, but Foreman was the one that taught me. And I can still remember finding my first chiasms without anybody else pointing it out and being like, is this a thing? I think this is a thing. I don't know if it's a thing. I think it's a thing. Is it a thing? And like checking, like I was so just convinced I was wrong and just learning like, oh gosh, I can do this. And I'm going to get some things wrong. So are you. It's all going to be a part of it. But I can just remember that feeling. So Kathleen, when you talk about this and what you're pointing out here, it's conceptual, but it feels good. It feels right to me. And it's your head is, at the very least, your head is exactly the right spot. And I love it. But Brian, what did you see in your notes here as you looked at Kathleen's suggestion here in Matthew 3?
Oh man, high five, Kathleen. This is great work. And perhaps it's right on. Could be. And I just love, when folks start listening, looking, hearing, just it's so awesome. And I think, like as you said, part of the idea of us, what we're trying to get out of the text is meaning, not just like the words on the page, right? So, and if a chiasm can help bring a better representation, as Marty talks about all the time, what the author's intent was for the author's audience, then man, that's so beautiful. So I think there's definitely something here. I have, again, in my little chiasm producer, something very similar. I think there's like a little chiasm at the top. 1 through 4 is about John the Baptist. It introduces John the Baptist. And you'll see at the end, there's an interaction between John and Jesus that is kind of the closing of that. And it's Jesus gets baptized. So John came baptizing in the beginning, repent for the kingdom. Jesus gets baptized John came baptizing, Jesus gets baptized. And I think that's a little parallelism, 14 to 15 and 16 to 17, line up with what John did and then what happened with the voice. So the voice is definitely there. One's the voice of a prophet up front, and then we have the voice of God down below. So I don't know if those two necessarily, but the big picture is there's definitely something there. John starts baptizing and Jesus gets baptized at the end. So I think there's something in the middle. Now, what's in the middle, I have a little difference. You could absolutely be right, though. That's where these things are. I mean, this is art, not science. That's what these things are, right? It's not.
Oh, say that again. I like it when you say that, Brian. Say that one more time.
This is art, not science. This isn't I'm right and you're wrong or anybody else. Like that's why it's in community and we wrestle and we keep talking and what's the meaning, okay? And I put my center more around the fruitfulness, okay? So in the center is this engagement with the Pharisees, right? Pharisees and Sadducees, and 8 says produce fruit in keeping with repentance, right? And 10 says every tree that does not produce good fruit, and that is 8 lines up with there's a thing that they reply back about Abraham, and then your verse, which you think might be the center, is 11. I baptize you with water for repentance. And that could be, but for me, that idea of not bearing fruit is an issue, and they could be together. It could be both of them. Okay. What I did then was go find basically the same passage in Luke. Okay. Because it's almost exactly the same. So Luke 3:7 through 17 it's this episode. Okay. And it does lay out a little differently. Okay. Because Luke has the Acts. He starts with, it's a weird chiasm. It goes ABC and then a 3-line center and then ABC at the end. Okay. So 7 is an A and 15 is an A. 8 is a B, 16 is a B. 9 is a C and 17 is a C. And the C's, 9 is now the axe is at the root of the trees, and 17 is all at the end. The winnowing fork is at the end. Okay. And in the middle are 3 different people groups saying, what should we do? Right after the response was produce good fruit. Okay, so what should we do? What should we do? Said the crowd. What should we do? Said the tax collectors. The soldier said, what should we do? Okay. And so it was all about, and each one of those about some example of producing fruit. So for me, the center became about fruit producing. And then going back to Matthew, that whole idea of fruitfulness is going to come up in the Sermon on the Mount. Okay. It's going to come up in chapters 12 and 13, and it's going to come up in chapter 21. So all those things about bearing fruit, as opposed to, in some case, being not the opposite, but putting fruitfulness ahead of judgment, right? Because in the sermon, he's going to say, you got to have the right kind of eye. You got to have a good eye to judge properly. And then all the way at the end of Matthew, because guess what? All of Matthew is probably chiastic. We're going to have those kinds of things repeated. Okay. And it's going to be way about fruitfulness. And you're going to see a lot more things about, using your resources to bear fruit, taking care of your neighbor to bear fruit, and all those kinds of things. So that's where I think the center might be fruitfulness. But again, what you did was beautiful, Kathleen, and it could be exactly right.
And they could be in conversation with each other. Like I'm hearing Brian say, fruit before judgment, like there's a relationship between these things, and the chiasm could be toying with that. I want to go back just for a moment to that statement that I love when Brian makes it, because it jerks me and jogs me out of this trance that I get in. This is art, not science. Now, I don't want to fly too far down. It's just art with no science. Like, if I believe in authorial intent, I'm going to go back to Dylan's question, is the author aware of these chiasms? Like, there is some level of objectivity to what we're trying to do to exegete. The author intended for this chiasm to be read a particular way. So I don't want to get away from that. But as a Western thinker, I get too wound up about the science and the mechanics of it. I want objectivity. I want the answer. And at the end of the day, we're all going to have to wrestle with this, because that's what it's designed to do anyway. It's not about just the answer. If it was, they would tell us the data like a Westerner does. But the whole point is to draw us into the wrestling match, to draw us into the literary device. And the literary device itself has an art component to it. And at the end of the day, any Jewish teacher, any Jewish rabbi, especially Jesus, especially the apostles, how much more even us today, as we try to do this interpretive work, we are choosing how we tell the story. A rabbi had to choose which midrash they wanted to teach from, because there's many. There's 5 to pick from. Which one am I going to pick, and why? Because it's like a rabbi choosing a color from a palette of, is that the right word? Palette? Anyway, choosing a color from their color of which to paint from. Like, they're choosing which midrash they want. They're choosing how they want to slice and dice this chiasm, because how they tell the story, and maybe in a different setting, they would address the chiasm slightly differently because of what it enables them to do in the context and for the. So it's art and science. It's art and science. It's not science. It's art. It's not just art. It's science. It's this dance between objectivity and dynamic, can't nail it down, squishy bar of soap, don't know where it's going. And we have to be somewhat good with that. All right. Oh, time just slips away. Before we get to our rapid fire response section, we did have a question here from Aaliyah, which it sounds to me like it might be Brad. Could be Bradley. I know them well. They are good, wonderful friends. If this is Aaliyah, my utmost apologies. I don't know if they share a Facebook or not. But he asks, at the end of Revelation, I see the tree of life mentioned twice at the end of Revelation. Is it a chiasm? How sneaky would it be of John, with this potential center, would invite the idea of God dwelling with man? So at the end, God comes down and his dwelling is, and we're told with the New Jerusalem that there's a tree of life there. And so the center of that chiasm could be God dwelling with mankind. Looks like it is, Brad. Says Elias says, yes, it is. Of course, it could be Elias saying, it is me. Who knows? Do you have any work that you've done at the end of Revelation in all your extensive chiasm notes, Brian?
I do.
Oh, what do you see?
I wish I could find the verses that easily with. I have a center. So the tree of life is in 22:2. Does that cross over? Yeah, I don't really have. I don't think I have a clean chiasm there.
Looks like chiasmus exchange has a chiasm between, and I don't always love this as a resource. It has a chiasm essentially in chapter 21, 21:3 to 22:7. It has the center being, I'm not even sure what the point of that would be, the measuring of the 12,000 furlongs. And then it has a chiasm at 22:7 through 21.
7 through 21.
7 through 21. And it talks
Yes.
about those who may
Is
enter.
Is the center the Alpha and Omega, first and last?
Yep.
Yeah, I have that one at the end.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
I'm just doing some checking here on. Hold on just a second. We can do this because we're live and I've got a connection to the internet. Okay, so Tree of Life shows up in Revelation 22:2, 22:14, and 22:19 would be the three references, and then shows up also in Revelation 2. So you've got one at 2:7, which that one seems to be odd. I wouldn't expect that to be a part of a chiasm. But then there is one from 22:2 through 22:19, which if I go back to the 22 chiasm, it doesn't quite play well with what this is. Could be though. Could be Bradley.
There actually might be a bigger one because 22:13 is I am the Alpha and the Omega, and 21:6 is I am the Alpha and the Omega.
Yep.
Which are both centers of smaller chiasms, I believe.
Brad is saying the angel actually is the bookends. I'm wondering too if what Brad's question could be is there a chiasm essentially in between Genesis and Revelation, which would have to be, I don't think that's what, but it might be what he was asking, between the two, the opening tree of life in Genesis and the closing tree of life in Revelation. Lots of people have asked that question. If it is, that would truly be a God-only chiasm, because at that point, we are crossing over canon. We're crossing over testaments between the Hebrews and the Christian scripture, between the Older and Younger Testament as the first and second, as Brian likes to call them. Love that about him. Their canon is going to be different than ours. Are we using the Protestant Reformation canon that is lacking the Apocrypha and the Deuterocanonicals? There's so many canon questions that shows up. So if there is a chiasm in that regard, that would truly be a very mystical, God only could have orchestrated that kind of chiasm, which I'm here for, so even if that wasn't necessarily the question, lots of people ask it, so I figured I would answer it. So anyway, there you go.
I'll give you two centers for that chiasm.
Okay, I love it.
The first one is Psalm 17, 18, and 19 all together.
Oh, stop it. You're giving me the whole Bible chiasm. I love it. Okay. Brian's here to play. Whenever I say I don't think so, Brian is always here to be like I do.
That's option one. Option two is Isaiah 32.
Oh, stop it. If there is, it's going to be, I'm in for both of those. I'm in for both of those. If that's the case, I'm here for it. All right, I love it. Hey, we've made it almost halfway through. It's time. It's time, Brent, for our rapid fire response section. Give us the music.
Oh man, I forgot about this. Where's my thing? Here we go.
It's here, everybody, every single time. So great. It makes my heart smile so much. All right, let's see. First rapid fire response from Tim. I'm a new listener a month or so ago, and I am well into session 6. Just wondering if you have heard of oneforisrael.org. I listen to them on YouTube. Messianic Jews, while their ministry is to Jews and Arabs in Israel. They are academics and only Christian Bible college in Israel, and the thrust is proving Messiah using Tanakh. A lot of their stuff is a rebuttal to rabbis who disagree on points of interpretation, but they show their case to the text. While not the thrust of your podcast, I see overlap and nuggets you may appreciate. I am familiar with One for Israel. It can be a great resource. I've heard a lot of amazing things from One for Israel. I actually, believe it or not, just linked this afternoon an article from One for Israel to a pastor friend of mine on the Palouse asking a question, and they had a quick write-up that was easy and quick to find. Generally speaking, One for Israel is problematic for me on multiple levels. So my rapid fire response is I am familiar with them. They're not my favorite resources. They do have some great stuff, and I appreciate what they're doing. It's just not necessarily the same vein or the same page that I'm on. But thanks, Tim, for the question. Alex says, what criteria does something have to be to meet a remez? What criteria does something have to meet to be a remez? Can someone call back to their own teachings and have it be a remez? Is making literary parallels a type of remez? So we've talked about parallelism somewhat today. Could you reference your own teachings? At this point, we're going to be talking about semantics of what we're referring to when we say remez or kesher, or what we're usually talking about is what scholars will call intertextuality. So one text talking to another text. Obviously, you can reference your own teaching. A work might reference itself, and that would just simply be a work of parallelism, of callback. It's the same principle, but remez as, I don't want to use the word science, but remez as a mechanic, or the way we typically use those words, is referring to intertextuality, one text referring to another text that predates itself. And typically, we'd be using that in the context of a that New Testament referring to the Hebrew scriptures, New Testament to Old Testament. New Testament not referencing itself, because again, that canon's not formed. That's not a body of work. So you're going to be talking New Testament going back to the Hebrew scriptures. Can the Hebrew scriptures reference themselves? Yes. Can a later part of scripture reference an earlier part of scripture in the Hebrew scriptures? Yes. And I do think there are places where it does that for sure. The David story, referencing and riffing off of the book of Judges. The David story referencing the book of Genesis. And then you're going to get into like, okay, well, when were these books written and which one was written down first and all that kind of stuff. That was a longer rapid fire response, but still rapid nonetheless. Rico said this. He says, I met Rico and talked to him before. He's in Kingsport, Tennessee, and he is an astronomer. And we had these great conversations. He was listening to session 5 and listening to us talk about Copernicus. And he linked an article and basically says, in short, what this person is suggesting is that medieval people struggled with the idea of Earth being in orbit around the sun because it exalted the Earth to be among the planetary orbs. After all, for Aristotle, Dante, and others, Earth was where all the junk, the crap in the universe collected. I can appreciate the sentiment that life can be hard, and terra firma doesn't seem to have that seem all that heavenly worth a look. Totally agree. Yeah, when we referenced that in session 5, we were doing that quickly in passing, keeping it simple, and we weren't acknowledging all the crazy complexity that drove people to have a geocentric understanding of the universe versus a heliocentric. So I didn't mean to think, well, how stupid are those people? I can't believe they were so dumb. They had no idea. And we talked about in session 5, there were theological reasons for clinging to that. But there's even more complexity. So I love Rico's passion for astronomy, and I love him sharing that. And that's awesome. Bill says, can you recommend companion books to help me better understand the Proverbs and Leviticus? Let me start with Leviticus, Bill. I can. We'll make this quick. The first one would be Rabbi David Foreman's most recent release is Leviticus, a Parashah Companion. I would hold it up for the camera, but it was buried under a pile of books that I didn't want to topple over. So I have it, but I won't show it to you. Rabbi Foreman, Brent might even grab links for these and throw them in the comments. Who knows? But that's that. Let's see here. Then we have Rabbi Jonathan Sachs has a book, Covenant and Conversation. That's a series where he goes over the entire parashah and has about 4 to 5 essays for every parashah reading. So this is Covenant and Conversation. This is the Leviticus volume. So that's a great one. These are going to be increasing in depth and headiness and getting harder and harder to read. So Foreman would be super accessible. Jonathan Sachs is going to be next in line as far as accessibility. If you get real crazy, I've got the complete works of Nachmanides, also known as the Ramban. That's going to start to get a little bit more heady. This is the Midrash, written around 1100 AD. So you're working with some history here. It's certainly dense. It's crazy time. But if you want to hear one of the great, more rabbinical thinkers, I don't even think you have to buy this. Is this on Sefaria? I would say Nachmanides is on. I would think his complete works is on Sefaria. I don't know. And then I have this that was sent to me by our good friend Ben Casperson, who might even be watching tonight, who knows. But he sent this. It is the Torah, JPS Torah commentary from a while ago. The editor is Levine, not Amy Jill. Where is it? But Baruch A., which made me wonder if Baruch is Amy Jill's father. I don't know, but they share the same name. Amy Jill Levine is an incredible Jewish scholar today. And I don't know if that's a relation. But anyway, I have not read this yet. It's on my to-read list. But if Ben sent it to me and said I was going to enjoy it, Ben knows how much I hate getting books. He also knows what I like and what I don't like. And he also knows that if he sends me a book that I don't like, I will hunt him down and I will find him. I have a unique set of skills. Okay. So that's the Leviticus stuff. And then, let's say, Brett, I'm going to share my screen. We're going to go over to Goodreads. I'm going to actually show you the book that I have for Proverbs. I don't have many books, but I have one book for Proverbs, and I'm going to show you my Goodreads just so that people can go and find it and see my books and find lots of other recommendations too, because somebody else is going to ask that as well. All right, I believe I'm sharing. I don't see it on my screen, but I'm up. Yeah. Brent, they can see it?
No.
Well, put it up, Brent.
I don't normally have to do anything. It just appears whenever you do that.
I know. It says it's sharing. It says stop sharing. I stop sharing. Now I share screen. Window. That window. Share.
Let me go back.
Nothing? There we go. Now we're cooking with gas. All right, who wants to be my friend? Who is this? I have a problem, everybody. I have to clear notifications. It's an obsessive compulsive. And right now it's not loading, which is horrible. Like it could not be worse than what's happening right now. All right, I'll stop. Let's see if it'll go to my books. No? There we go. Okay. Oh, here are all my books. If you want to understand and decode my Goodreads, anything 4 stars is above. If you were to go to my profile, you should be able to see my books that I've read and rated. Anything 4 stars and above is a recommendation. That means it's good enough. I think you should read it. I usually write a review for any 4-star and above book. So let's see here. Where is it? Where is it? I'm looking for the tree of life. Where are you? There it is, right there. This book right here. The Tree of Life, an exploration of biblical wisdom literature. I gave it 4 stars. I thought it was a great little academic source. I don't have a lot for Proverbs, but there you go. That's it. I still want to know who wants to be my friend. Johnny's wants to be my friend. We have approved Johnny's. I am kind and benevolent, and everybody gets to be my friend on Goodreads. I'm going to have to approve 100 people to be my friend on Goodreads. There you go, Brent. That's all I need to show people. You are welcome to... Well, I'll stop sharing my screen. I'll put it that way. Okay, there you go. Boom. I'm back. I'm back, baby. All right. I got out of my Google Doc. That's horrible. All right, rapid fire response. This is not very rapid, but it is fire. Jack. Oh man, Jack sent 7 questions, which is a great Jewish number, by the way, Jack. And they're all rapid fire response. So here we go. Question number 1. What books would you recommend to strengthen my faith in Jesus and to trust the story more? I just showed you my Goodreads, and that's a great place to start. I would go to that page. There you go. What books would you recommend to help with the Pardes interpretation of what Jesus said and also the Pardes of the Old Testament? I don't have any good specifically Pardes references. I would also recommend that you make sure that you watch the addendum video about Pardes, because I wasn't clear enough about some things, and I added that addendum video to the show notes to bring some clarity to what I believe about Pardes and how I'm using Pardes. I am not using Pardes in the Jewish mysticism sense. I'm using it as a rough construct to teach us the construct of Jewish hermeneutics. I'm not using it in the mechanical, allegorical, mystical sense, all right? So that video is super important. Because there are books out there on Pardes, but it's not going to be the same thing that I'm trying to do in Bema. So here's some scholars I could recommend for intertextuality. There's that word again, intertextuality. I would recommend Richard Hayes as a big intertextuality scholar. Bauckham, does Bauckham do a lot of intertextuality stuff? Brian, you're still there?
Yeah.
Okay, Bauckham would be another one that you could use for that. So there you go. Number 3, do you have a book list?
I just learned, by the way, that when Brian is off the screen, he's not muted. So I guess it's good he wasn't muttering terrible things about you.
Yeah, totally. That's a horrible book. That's a dumb recommendation. Do you have a book list anywhere of general books you recommend? Oh, baby. Brent is going to put in the chat bemadiscipleship.com/resources. bemadiscipleship.com/resources is the entire catalog of everything we have ever linked. Doesn't mean we recommend it. It just means we've referenced it. But everything we've ever linked, most of those are going to be recommendations on one level or another. And just because we recommend something doesn't mean we agree with everything in it. I don't know of a single book outside the Bible where that's true. But there's a link that you can do. How can I enact Jesus more to the people around me? Continue to grow and to be discipled. New Zealand is quite secular, and my friends and families are secular. I don't want to be trite or silly in a rapid fire response section, Jack, but what we do at Impact is we pursue Jesus every day. You create space for Jesus. You create space for God. God fills that space. God is a part of your life. You don't always feel it. You don't always hear some divine voice from the sky. You don't always think that God is necessarily at work, but you show up every single day and you make space for Jesus. And every now and then, Jesus tells you things and you should do them. What Jesus tells you, you say yes to, and you surrender your life. And that feels cliche. But that is the simplicity of what it means to follow Jesus. It's also the most difficult thing we will do, because we will have to die to ourselves every single day. Number 5, how do I memorize a text more? You start tomorrow. You memorize a little bit every single day. I like to memorize a weekly chunk. So I memorize a little bit on Monday. I add a little bit more on Tuesday. I add a little bit more on Wednesday. Maybe I'll add a little bit more on Thursday. If it's a little rough, I'll spend Thursday and Friday just cleaning it up. At the end of the week, I recite it, and if I've gotten it recited, I put it away. I don't stack. I don't go back the next week and try to add to the previous week. I have one weekly portion that I just try to. How much, Marty? How much should I memorize? That's up to you. I'm not even going to tell you because that's up to you. Some people it will be one verse, 3 verses, 1 paragraph. Some people it will be 3 or 4 paragraphs. Some people it might be a page. I don't know. We all memorize differently. Quantity, not important. Quality, the thing that matters. Not quantity, quality. Not quantity, quality. Not quantity, quality. How do I know what a good church is or is not? Best recommendation, look for fruit. What's the fruit? That's what Jesus told us about teachers. That's what Jesus told us about being aware. Testing is what John told us about testing things. Look for the fruit. Is there love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control? Does it come from that church? Is that the kind of fruit that you see in that spiritual community? If so, that's being produced by the Spirit, and on some level, that community is walking with the Spirit. It's not about Bible teaching. It's not about hermeneutics. It's not about whether or not they listen to the Bema podcast. It's not about whether or not they do intertextuality. It's not about whether or not they're this denomination or that tradition. It's not about whether or not they do this thing or that dogma. It's about whether or not they're walking in step with the Spirit, and the Spirit's producing fruit. But the fruits of the flesh, Paul tells us, are obvious. Fits of rage, envy, malice, debauchery. If that's what your church is producing, division, okay, that's probably a bad fruit. Doesn't mean they're evil. Doesn't mean they're all going to hell. It just means, how do I know what a good church is or not? There you go. I can tell a good tree from good fruit. I can't get good fruit from a bad tree, Jesus told me. I can't get bad fruit from a good tree. It's not how it works. How do I increase my ability to discern? As I don't feel incredibly wise, just keep growing. Jack, there's no shortcut. There's no shortcut to this. There's no shortcut. Just keep giving yourself grace and slowly grow, slowly grow, slowly grow, slowly grow. So there you go. There's your 7 questions. Got it. Dana had a rapid fire question. I have a question about Genesis 9:24. Someone told me that Noah was castrated, but the word castrated is not in the Bible. I looked it up in the Hebrew version. No castration word found. Basically, it's just assumed, correct? Somebody must have been listening to the Bema podcast and told you about that. That's not very far into the podcast, Dana. So if you're listening to the Bema podcast, and if you started at the beginning, that should not be far into that. Should be a few episodes in, and you're going to run into that story. It's the first story that people start to have major problems because what we're doing is we're leaning into Jewish midrash. Is it assumed? Your question says basically it's assumed, correct? Not assumed. It's Jewish commentary. It's the wisdom that Judaism is trying to speak into the story. Judaism is saying it's castration. The question is, why is that wisdom? So it's not about what actually happened. It's not an assumption. It's a teaching trying to get us to learn something, to be transformed by that. We talk about that in the podcast. Make sure you start at the beginning and follow that journey, because that's part of the first stops that you make. And then we come back, by the way. Brent could link the original episode, whatever the original one. A Misplaced Curse, I believe, is the name of that episode. And then we come back at the beginning of session 6, and we go a little bit deeper, and we talk a little bit more about what Midrash is. And that's going to be episode 207, 208, 209, somewhere in there. I don't know. So there you go. Brent will link those in the chat. Monty says, episode 142 is brilliant and very eye-opening. Sorry I'm late to the game. Fascinating to think of Paul following in the footsteps of ancient prophets. One thing I'd like to add, as Marty walked through Paul's experience in the Acts story, it appears that Paul also faced the exact same adversary as Jesus. He's accepted by the Mumsers and some faithful Goyim and Pharisees, but violently rejected by those in power, political and religious, because they felt threatened. It is always the violent opposition of empire that he preaches the way of shalom, just as it was for Jesus. It is always those fearing the loss of power and or money who come against Paul. You're absolutely right, Monty. And I would say it's even bigger than I had a Jewish teacher that taught my teacher that when you study Paul in the book of Acts, he says it's the exact same play-by-play as Jesus. He says, have you ever heard of a Jewish rabbi, a Jewish teacher, who has about 12 disciples, who is persecuted by the religious leadership, who is ultimately accused of speaking against the temple, who will die for Paul's whole story follows Jesus' story play by play by play by play. So you pointed out already some great parallels, and the parallels go further than you've even seen, Monty. So the answer to that is absolutely. Last rapid fire response. Gonzalo says, I was wondering if you guys have done a podcast on the 7 feasts of the Lord. Excuse me, and what their symbolism is in thorough detail. Also, I was wondering if you could make a Christian how-to guide of celebrating the feasts so as to have a first-hand experience of walking through the symbolism and connecting the dots between the Old Testament command and its significance post-revelation of Jesus. Well, Gonzalo, I'm going to say 2 things. Number 1, I have created what you're looking for. It is a festival edition playlist. I've been doing it for 4 years, 5 years. Over on my YouTube channel, Brent will link to that playlist there. Make sure you start at the beginning, Gonzalo, because one of the things I'm going to say at the beginning of that playlist is I don't think Christians should be celebrating those feasts. Those Gentile Christians should be celebrating those feasts. All kinds of things about appropriation we need to be wary of, all kinds of stuff like that. So make sure you watch the first few videos because I touch on that and why that's so important. But if you want to learn about the feasts, that whole playlist is there. I do think it's wonderful to learn about the feasts. I think it's wonderful to learn from Jews and be able to join Jews in their celebration, but it's not our celebration. It's a Jewish celebration. We want to make sure we don't appropriate those things. There you go, Brent. Cue the music. That took longer than I wanted to, but
Well, yeah. Sorry, I thought that I should like do all these other things first, but I should have just whatever.
Oh, not your music cue. The rapid fire section took me
Oh,
longer than
oh.
Goodness. I wouldn't
Yeah.
throw shade at you like that in the middle of the live stream. Come on, Brent. That was 3
Hey.
seconds late.
Well, I was so slow on the first one. I was like, he's going to be ready for the closing, but nope.
Yeah, it's okay. Hey, everybody, we always pause. We're going to make this quick because we want to get back to chiasms and be able to maximize our time with Brian. But just thanks for all your guys' support. We do this every single live stream, and we always stop and we acknowledge that we do this every single live stream. But we also acknowledge that we do this because it's that important to us. We appreciate your support. Everything we're doing at Bayma is made possible by you guys. We are in the middle of year-end giving season right now. And some like 80% of the donations raised in the nonprofit sector will come in over the course of these last 6 weeks of the year. This will be the 6 weeks that will balance our budget for the whole year. We're trying to balance that budget. We've tried to make some changes around here at Bayma and at Impact that basically make us align with the values that we've taught throughout Bayma. We've taught things about circling the wagons around the most marginalized and circling the wagons around the weak and those that don't have. We've talked about generosity. We've talked about hospitality. And at the end of the day, we had to come to grips with whether or not we were operating that way financially in our own organization. And we needed to make some changes. And so we set out to make those changes this year. We've got some more changes to make next year. And that puts a number out in front of us. We're trying to make a difference of about $400,000 this year, probably another $400,000 next year if everything lays out the way it ought to. And then we should be caught up and in a place where we feel like we are practicing what we preach. And so that's what we have in front of us. And those gifts are coming in, and people have heard that call, and people are responding. And if you give, even in the most smallest way, there are so many of you giving $10 a month, giving $15 a month, $20 a month. It's making a huge difference in steady income. And then there are some of you that are hearing the call, and you're writing these much bigger checks of $5,000, $10,000, $40,000. And that is making the difference. That is what we're going to need to turn the corner as well. And so all of us working together, every single one of you, no matter who you are, it all comes together to make a difference. That's how it's always worked from the days of Leviticus till the day today. And so we're just very thankful. So thank you. We also had a live, Brett, jump in here. Tell me about this live comment that came in.
Yeah, Alyssa said, Marty, do you plan on, and I assume she's including me, but do you plan on coming to Minnesota anytime soon? I wasn't able to make it to Janesville, Wisconsin last week, and I wasn't make it to Janesville either. So I understand your pain, Alyssa. I don't know, Marty, are we coming to Minnesota? How do we find out?
I have Minnesota on my 2025 schedule. It is yet to be scheduled. It will likely be summer, maybe early fall of 2025. but Minnesota is on my schedule. I cannot remember where, but I know I can see it in my mind exactly where it is in my notebook. It's on my next round of things to schedule. So I am, which is cool because I usually don't answer that question with yes. But in this case, Alyssa, yes, I am coming to Minnesota and it will be great. And I
The
will see
calls,
you.
the calls for Minnesota have been strong recently. So I don't know what's going on
Really?
there, but it seems like
All
we get a
right.
lot of questions about Minnesota recently.
Man. Okay. Wow. Minnesota was not, when I got the email, I was like, wow, Minnesota? Didn't even know anybody was listening to Baymon in Minnesota. And yeah, so that's picking up. Okay. Good to know. All right.
Anyway, you can sign up for the Bama Messenger. You'll get an email once a month. It'll tell you where we're going to be basically for the next 3 months, at least Marty. Usually it'll tell you about me for like the next month because I'm not as good at planning ahead as Marty is. But sign up for the Bama Messenger on the news page of the website. I will link that right now. And you can also check that same news page for the latest updates on anything that might be happening, like when we goof up the live stream date. The right information will be on the website. So use that resource.
Yep. Love it. Thanks, Brent. All right, we're a little bit behind. We got 40 minutes and 2 chiasms, and then we got to have some time to dive into all this work that Brian's done on Romans. So really, we have like 3 chiasms to do. We can do this. I have much hope and reason to have that hope. Here we go. We gave Brian a little break. We're about ready to dive right back in. Michael says this. He asked us this question back in June. He says, I first want to say thanks for responding to previous messages. You were right. The questions I asked were answered in later sessions. That's how it works, but it's okay. Ask the questions anyway. I was reading in 1 Kings 14 and thought I found a chiasm under the Rehoboam rules in Judah section. In my first read through, I'm using the NLT. I was wondering if you had any insight there. And then he outlines the chiasm. So the A parts is becoming king. This is in 1 Kings, becoming king in chapter 14, 21 and 31. There's a mention of the mother in 21 and 31. There's a mention of ancestors in 22 and 31. There's a mention of war with Egypt in 25 and 30. There's a mention of taking your shields in 26 and 28. So it forms this kind of this perfect little, I love it. This is objective. Like these are actual unique words you're finding here, references. Michael, I think you're nailing this. The middle of the chiasm would be 1427. King Rehoboam later replaced them, the gold shields, with bronze shields as substitutes. My interpretation of the center of this chiasm is that Judah goes from a nation with much to a nation with nothing. Rehoboam's reign ends with replacing the gold with bronze. Gold shields would be God, bronze shields would be the pagan gods and cheap imitations. The only section I'm having trouble finding a match for is verses 23 through 24, which outline the fall into paganism and detestable practices of the people. Ooh, that's interesting. And I have some thoughts on that. If Brian doesn't, we'll see. Come to think of it, I guess there are 2 sections. These 2 sections do match up, but if that's the case, they're out of order. Brian, you say winner, winner, chicken dinner in your notes. Tell me more.
Yeah, and I don't really have anything to add. No, I think it's beautiful. Like I have the same thing almost exactly. And a brilliant job hearing it, finding it. I'd like to hear what Marty has to say about the question you had about 23 and 24. That would be awesome. But what I think I found is right above it. Okay. In 1 through 18 is another little chiasm around the other Bowen boy. Okay. And outlining the disaster on Jeroboam and his house. There's another chiasm. I think the center is 10 and 11. Because of this, I'm going to bring disaster on the house of Jeroboam. And then, of course, my comment was, you mean both the Bowen boys and a world of hurt? Shocker. So that's, no, it's beautiful. I think that's there for a reason to see how, this split, this pursuit of empire is just continually, bringing disaster on those who are pursuing it. But yeah, that's what I had. Great job.
Yeah, I would echo that. I think it is a great job. Very objective. finding the pieces here. I love that it matches perfectly with what Brian sees. I love, Brian, that the other chiasm with Jeroboam. I'm looking at that right now. That's fantastic. My thought is about those verses 23 and 24. What it does for me, Michael, is it basically lends credence to, well, A, it relates to the chiasm that Brian just pointed out above with Jeroboam. But B, it would lead credence to what you're seeing and how you're interpreting the center. So one of the things that Foreman says, and Brian was referencing this earlier, I heard Foreman teach it like this. Foreman said, every imperfect chiasm is a perfect chiasm in disguise. What he meant by that is you see these pieces, like you've outlined it, but you're like, I have this piece that doesn't fit. Like I have this piece that doesn't. What that means is that the author has put that part of the chiasm because it's part of the conversation. It's either talking to the center, or like Brian said when he talked about you zoom out. What Foreman talks about when he says zooming out, I thought I had A, B, C, D, E, D, B, C. It's out of order. It should be D, C, B, A, but and Foreman will say zoom out, and B, C isn't two components, it becomes one component. And usually that component coming together is actually a part of the teaching. It's a part of the treasure. Like the person is saying these two things are not separate. You need to go back and look at why these things are there to begin with. So when you have a piece, it's like Genesis 1. Remember when we did the Genesis 1 chiasm and we said, well, there's this big like awkward insertion of humankind. Like the chiasm of Genesis 1 works perfectly when you don't have the creation of humans. Like if the chiasm starts right after God makes the beasts of the field, the chiasm is perfect. Chef's kiss. Like exactly count the Hebrew words, you nail it. But then you have this big like awkward insertion of God creating mankind. Why? Because Genesis 1 is particularly about how mankind fits in the larger schema of creation and God's love. So in the same way, this part that doesn't fit in the chiasm is actually the part where they're selling out gold for bronze. This is what it looks like for them to be selling out the gold shields for the bronze shields as you've interpreted it. So I think it's just even one more feather in your cap of what you found there. All right, one more in our document, and then we'll have time to look at some Roman stuff. This one, Brian, comes from somebody named Marty. Back in October 24th, Marty Solomon, we usually don't say last names, but Marty Solomon sent in this question. He says, I have one of my own. Hosea, we're doing right now in season 9 of the podcast, a series on Hosea. And I'm about ready to record the last episode tomorrow of the series. So I've made it all the way through. There's only like half of them published at this point, but I've made it all the way through. So I've now seen the whole book. Brian, there's got to be a chiasm. I can't find anybody online. Chiasmus Exchange doesn't have it, at least what I'm trying to find or see or look at. I did use the literary structure, the Japanese algorithm scholar that put together his database. There's some stuff on there. Possibly it's the whole book of Hosea. Possibly there's a chiasm between chapters 4 and 14. Here's the components I'm seeing, Brian. I'm seeing references to Beit Aven, references to Gibeah. The phrase, what can I do with you, Ephraim? And the phrase, oh, Ephraim, how can I give you up? For whatever reason, feel similar to me. They sound similar, like it's a refrain that God's offering up. There's references to bird snaring, multiple references to bird snaring. So I have in here, help me, Brian Chiasm Kenobi. You are my only hope. Tell me what you've put down here.
Oh, my word. Did you ever get a chance to look at the document that I linked for you?
I did.
Okay. So yeah, so one of my practices, I wish I could, is I will take the entire text that I'm looking at, because I always think, including things like Romans and whatever, and put them in like a Word doc without any paragraph headings without even verse numbers, without, just put them in a doc. And then that makes it easy to kind of search in Word for English kind of connections. And then I'll end up going back and looking for, the Hebrew or Greek connections, depending on what we're talking about. But I mean, a lot of things you found when I did that. So I have the whole thing of Hosea in a document. And there is, I think, a definite connection between the beginning of not my people, to my people, not loved, or not under my mercy, and to my mercy, compassion and not compassion. And then chapter 2, the renewal of the wedding vow. My betrothed, and I will love you, and all that. And then at the end, chapter 13, the end of chapter 13, there's a big, Ephraim, what will I do with you? And, do I keep all this from you? It's almost like the rhetoric that, again, we're going to hear again. And then in 14, he says, absolutely, there's going to be restoration, reconciliation. There's going to be a calling back. And in the middle, what I found, and there's other things along the way. There's the connections on both sides to the cities, Gilgal, Gibeah, and Bethaven, and all those kinds of things. All those things that you saw are definitely, almost all of them are on both sides that I found. But what I found, the center, and basically this whole center, is chapters 7 through 9. And it brings up, and there's 6 and 10, or 6 and 11 have both speaking, and you guys talked about it, I think, about the idea of repentance, that there needs to be a repenting on both sides of that. And in the middle, all of a sudden, Assyria becomes Egypt. And there is a return to Egypt throughout chapter 7 and 9.
Sure. Yeah, sure.
Okay. And the center, again, is there a pure, clean center? I'm not sure. But the end of chapter 8, this is the end of chapter 8. Though Ephraim built many altars for sin offerings, these have become altars for sinning. I wrote for them the many things of my instruction, my Torah, but they regarded them as something foreign. Though they offer sacrifices as gifts to me, and though they eat the meat, the Lord is not pleased with them. Now he remembered their their rasha, their wickedness, and punished their sins. They will return to Egypt. Part of the whole thing we've talked about before, you guys talked about on the podcast, it's not just about getting the people out of Egypt. It was about getting Egypt out of the people. And this has been a struggle in all the prophets. And that's one of the big, the end of chapter 7 basically says the same thing. The end of chapter 9, all three of these are basically saying you're going back to Egypt. 9, they will not remain in the Lord's land. Ephraim will return to Egypt and eat unclean food in Assyria. So he's connected like this Assyrian invasion to returning to Egypt. And then the same thing in chapter 7. They do not repent. It's shuvah. They do not shuvah to the Most High. They are like a faulty bow. Their leaders will fall by the sword because of their insolent words. For this, they will be ridiculed in the land of Egypt. And starting in chapter 7, it's Egypt, like all the way through the end, gets kind of reinstated as this issue. And but again, on both sides, bookends, there's a problem, and there's restoration. There's repentance as you move in towards the middle, and then Hosea is a little bit, because with the warning, woe, and hope thing, the hope is on the bookends.
Yep.
He's light on warning, like this is pretty much a done deal.
Yeah.
Right. So there's woe. Yep. This is woe. The center 7 to 9 is all the woe. There's hope as the bookends, though. And that's what I came up with, a lot of it. And then there's actually more details that do line up, but it's not totally clean.
No, I love it. I'm going to show, are you okay if I show this document, Brian?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Because
Yeah, if you can.
what I love, I'm going to share this, Brent. I don't know what you had to do, what magic you had to work. Part of what I love when we get to show this to people is you get to see, like, you can hear Brian talking about it. Some of us are visual learners, but some of us also want to like envision, how does Brian do this? How does Brian take a book, take a passage, and what does he start doing to, and your brain works differently than mine. I get stuck finding chiasms because I'm too linear and I'm too systematic. And when I see your master docs that you're working with, it helps me go, oh, that's got to be so helpful for people that have a different brain than me. So I just wanted to show this because what you see is he's got the whole text. Again, he's taken away chapter numbers, taken away verse numbers. All you've got is straight text. And he just starts going through and identifying repetition, identifying parallelism, identifying stuff that, so that as he works, he can start to pull things together. So as I scroll through here, you're going to see different things color coded. I absolutely love how Brian will utilize colored font, color highlights to keep track of different themes, cut them to pieces. Look at that. But then I noticed you started noticing Egypt. This is where that Egypt changes.
Yep.
I'm assuming, Brian, because now all of a sudden, Egypt. You get to visually see how the conversation has now shifted. It was Assyria. It is now Egypt.
Yep.
Golly, it's great. And then again, I just keep seeing these paragraphs. Brian saw even more than I did, but these paragraphs down here are these green paragraphs. They have a similar conceptual flow to them. They fit, and then a whole bunch of notes at the end. For anybody that like your brain works like this is it, man. This is fantastic. So, oh, there's a fun paragraph, probably heretical. Anyway, I won't read that. But yeah, so that's great. For anybody that finds that helpful, and it'll help them envision like, oh, I could do that. That's why I wanted to fire this up and share the screen. But there we go. Thanks, Brian, for sharing that. That's great.
Amen.
All right, we got a couple comments that came in, and then we're going to close with some Romans. How can I deny Brian David some Romans? Let's see here. James says, oh, this might be a James that you know. When I found Israel, it was like finding grapes in the wilderness. 9 verse 10. Probably a reference to what you were talking about earlier. Nancy says, I love chapter 6. Thank you for doing Hosea. I got a lot of really great feedback over last week's episode. A lot. And that was very encouraging to me. Obviously, we recorded that episode a while ago. All these episodes were recorded a while ago. The last few were within the last couple of weeks, but yeah, that was good. I had some really meaningful messages and emails come in about that. And so I'm just very glad. I'm very glad. I'm glad that we're still producing new content that people are like, boom, that was one of your better episodes in a long time. That's awesome. I love that. And then Robert says, why am I not surprised that guys with the names David and Solomon are sharing so much wonderful insight into the scriptures? You are too kind, Robert. Sorry. I put Robert and Donald together. Robert Donaldson. Thanks for that. That's awesome. All right. We've got 21 minutes. Brian, I think you should melt our minds to close our live stream tonight. Romans is fantastic. Like, we've touched on some of the inclusio and some of the chiasm that's in Romans in session 4. But I'm betting when you open up this Google Doc or whatever doc we're about ready to see, we're in for a wild, wild ride. So take it away.
Alrighty.
I got my giant mouse ready to point anything out that you talk about.
Yeah, I don't want to go through the whole thing. I just want to go through the center, the proposed center. So scroll down. Just start scrolling.
Look at all of these wonderful colors.
Wait. You went too far. I'm sorry.
Oh, too far.
I was looking at the wrong screen. Look at the one, not that one, not that one. Keep going a little more. That one, I think. What's the center of that one? I can't see it on your screen.
Moreover, the righteousness grounded in trusting.
The one right in the middle of that page, down below, that one. Yeah, that's the right one. You're there. Good. That's where I want to start. Okay. Actually, go back where you were. Up a little. Right there.
That was
Let's see when it gets there. Yep, that's the one I want right there. So let's just leave it there. So, Romans, Paul. I have some rules for engaging Paul. One, there's a lot of little words that make a big deal, like so and by, and the pronouns, and in. They're these words that you've just got to learn to be flexible about when you engage Paul. Number one. Number two, there's a actually this chiasm. It's pretty popular right now. N.T. Wright came out a while ago, a couple years ago, and said there's a chiasm in Romans 9 through 11, which is like the big chapter on what's happening with the Jews and all that kind of thing. After when the last Gentile gets saved, then the Jews might come back in, and all this kind of stuff at the end. And of course, the famous verse in chapter 10, if you confess with your mouth and you believe with your heart, you will be saved, right? And that's how it's all about who gets saved, the big things. And so there's this that's been a chiasm. It's been debated between some other scholars. I don't know if I think some of y'all in Slack were talking about the guy at Disciple Dojo. Some of you might be familiar with him. Actually went through that chiasm in the same way that pretty much the same way that Wright did, and showed people, and he used markers and lines and color coded stuff, and it was cool, and just kind of showed how he worked from the outside in. And that's all, and that's all beautiful. They all have the same center, right? Which is that verse in 10:9 or whatever, 10:8 and 9, about how we get saved by confessing with our mouth and believing in our heart, right? So, and again, according to the school of Brian's biblical chiastic heresy, that would not be the center. Okay,
it's because it's not the center, Brian. I'm here I'm giving accreditation to Brian's school of heretical apostasy. I'm here for it.
Amen, brother. Thank you. And it actually speaks to the Hosea group, because Paul loves him some Hosea in this section in Romans 9 through 11. His normal favorite prophet is Isaiah, and he uses some Isaiah here, but he loves him some Hosea on both sides of the center. And it's all about mercy, right? Which is the raham word in Hosea, compassion. It's all about that on both sides. And it actually comes to where if we look at this chiasm and just kind of let go of because who's he writing this to? He's writing to people that are saved. He's not telling people how to get saved here, right? He's writing, I think, and Marty and I wrestle with this a little bit, but I think the bulk of the audience of the letter are believing Gentiles in Rome, okay? And the bookends start with Paul crying out, praying, saying he would give up his own life for his brothers and sisters who have, theirs is Torah, theirs is the patriarchs, theirs is all those things. And then at the very end, at the end of chapter 11, he said the gifts and the calling of God are irrevocable. And we have to read that like that's for us Gentile believers, but it's actually the connection of the bookend to the gifts that God gave Israel are irrevocable. He's not revoking those, okay, in any way, shape, or form. Okay, so there's ways to work in the center. I'm not going to go through all that. because it would take too long. But when you look at this center, it brings a couple things, and that's what we kind of have on the screen. I don't know if there's any way to zoom, but there's confessing and trusting, and heart goes on trusting, and mouth and confesses towards deliverance. And that's all in like what we call 9 and 10. Up above that is a word about the Messiah, and where does that come from? A righteousness, where does that come from? That leads into that. And then verse 11 says, it kind of, these are the next to the center. As scripture says, anyone who faces him will not be put to shame. And 13, everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. Okay. For me, and then outside of that, as we go down to 15 through 17, it's going to connect up to 6 through 7 about the word about the Messiah. Okay. And it's going to say, how can anyone, hear unless someone, the beautiful feet people from Isaiah, bring them that good news? Not all they haven't accepted it, because Paul's issue is there are some faithing Israelites in Rome, and there are some non-faithing Israelites in Rome. Okay, as a part of this group, and he's writing to faithing Gentiles, and he's going to tell them, you all. Because in the very next thing, once he finishes this about what's going on with the yet to faith Israelites, yet to hear and understand and call on Yeshua as Messiah, Israelites, I'm asking you in 12 through 15, the rest of the letter, go be the sweet smelling aroma Theseus sacrifice that helps them find Messiah. You go be the beautiful feet people. You Gentiles, okay? Because likely, again, if you connect all these things back in, Acts, right? Why did he even write this letter? He heard about issues. Again, N.T. Wright says that, there was Claudius issued an edict in 49 that said the Jews got to go. So the Gentiles were there running their own show for a few years. And then in 64, when Nero came in, the Jews came back. So now we got issues between Jew and Gentile. He likely could have heard about this from Priscilla and Aquila right out of Acts 18 while he was with them in Cenchreae or Corinth. So he's heard this. So he's heard some of this stuff. He doesn't know these. He hasn't been to Rome yet. In fact, he says he wants to come to Rome. And he writes this letter because he's heard, maybe he's heard there's issues between Jew and Gentile, which is half of the stuff he's always written about. As prophet to the Gentile, which he explains multiple times in Acts 19 through 26. I was called as prophet to the Gentile. Okay. In Galatians 1, he looks like Jeremiah. In Acts 9, he looks like Jonah. And then in 22 and 24, he looks like Isaiah and Ezekiel. Okay. He's painting himself as the prophet to the Gentiles. So all those things come in, and for me, that makes the center. There is no difference between Jew and Gentile. Adonai is the same for everyone, rich toward everyone who calls on him. Okay? That's the center of this letter, as he's trying to get the Gentiles to love their yet to faith Jewish neighbors that are still part of the community. Okay? You go be the Thesean, the sweet smelling, the olah sacrifice, the burnt sacrifice, not a sin sacrifice, not any other kind of sacrifice. That's the word he uses in chapter 12. He uses the Greek word for the olah, for the burnt sacrifice, for the sweet smelling aroma that makes God happy, right? That's what the Gentiles are called to be for those yet to faith. And why would I say that, Brian? Why would you go away from what everyone else says is the center? Okay. So now if you scroll down towards the bottom of that document, Brent, if we go back, let's go back. Okay. And you can see that Prophet Shaul, Rabbi Paul, okay, starts the letter 1:16. The gospel is God's saving power for everyone who believes, for the Jew first and also for the Greek. 2:8-9, there will be affliction, distress, and everyone who does evil, both the Jew first and the Greek, but glory and honor and peace for everyone who does good, Jew first and the Greek. 3:9-11, all our famous verses. Are we any better off? No, not at all. If we have already charged that all, both Jews and Greeks, so let's remember that. A word like all, he just says all, both Jews and Greeks. Okay? Both Jews and Greeks are under the power of sin, as it is written. 3:22-24. Again, none of them are famous verses, right? For there is no distinction, since all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. Now, that all, both Jews and Greeks, right? And then 3:28-30. For behold, that a person is justified by faith apart from works prescribed by the law, or is God the God of Jews only? No. Is he not the God of Gentiles also? Okay, so this is his theme all the way through the beginning of the book. That this is yes, of Gentiles also, since God is one. He's basically quoting the Shema. And all these themes come all the way through up to chapter 10. For there is no distinction between Jew and Greek. The same Lord is Lord of all, is generous to all who call on him. All the way through 15, 7-9, when he wraps up his instruction section in chapter 15, welcome one another, Jew and Greek, just as Christ has welcomed, Messiah has welcomed you for the glory of God. For I tell you that Messiah has become a servant of the circumcised on behalf of the truth of God, in order that he might confirm the promises given to the ancestors, and that the Gentiles might glorify God for his mercy. Okay, so all the way through this letter, we find that this matches up again with, I think, what Paul's calling his mission is to bring primarily as prophet to the Gentiles, appropriate halacha, appropriate walk, appropriate life, okay, in this Jew-Gentile mixed people of God that are basically are supposed to be Kedushing Hashem, hallowing the name together, okay? So that's why I see this, one, the chiasm's there, but two, it's way more about what Paul's always talking about, Jew, Gentile. And I'll add just one more thing. The other favorite book, right? This Paul, so in Rome, if he's writing to Gentiles, he's writing to Gentiles who maybe are struggling with their non-faithing Jews. The other famous book that talks a lot of the same things is Galatians, right? And he's writing to Gentiles who are having the opposite problem, okay, where the Jews or the Judaizing Jews are trying to get the Gentiles to become Jews. And Paul says, neither one of those are the gospel, all right? Not loving on your yet to faith Jewish neighbors is not the gospel, and nor a Gentile becoming Jewish, thinking that's going to do anything for them, is not the gospel. And there's a chiasm in, I think, Galatians 3 and 4 that runs across them, okay? And I'm not going to go through that whole chiasm, but just as support for the Romans one, the center of that chiasm, you can guess it, is
it's the baptismal formula.
Is Galatians 3:28. There is neither Jew nor Gentile.
Nor Greek. Yep.
Nor Greek, neither slave nor free. That's the center of that chiasm that runs across 3 and 4, because this is Paul's message. Either way,
Yep.
you don't have to become Jewish to Kiddush Hashem, but don't be the light, the sacrifice, the people that help that bring the good news to your yet to faith Jewish neighbors, and not even Jewish, but Israelite, yet to faith Israelite neighbors. And that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
I love it. I still don't know what I think about the audience of Romans, but this is exactly the argument of Romans. No matter who the audience is, this is what Paul is up to in Romans. And we talk about it in session 4, It does relate to Galatians as well. I love the connection there. Of course, that's the center of the chiasm. That is literally the reason he's writing that letter. But our Christian training tells us that Romans is this theological treatise. And so everything we do in Romans is trying to like extract Christian theology from it, which is why we want it to be, if you confess with your mouth, it becomes a soteriological chiasm. But it's quite literally, objectively not the chiasm in form, in literary form, nor does it fit the actual heart of his letter, which is the relationship between Jew and Gentile together. That Jew and Gentile together come together, and neither one of them has any position above the other. We are both full-fledged members of this family, and we have this call, which is why the center of that chiasm would be exactly what you identified. And I love your color coding. I think the problem, actually, Brian, is scholarship. N.T. Wright doesn't have your color coded Google Doc. Because once it's been color coded, the call is irrevocable and the chiasm is undeniable. So there you go. That's that's what I think. I absolutely love that. I absolutely love that. I think it's 100% spot on. It is exactly Paul's argument. And it fits with, like, if you were to go back and listen to our session 4 material, there is this larger chiasm that we talk about across the whole book. There's an inclusio. There's all these things at play. And that chiasm fits within, I'm very interested in 30 plus chiasms, but nevertheless, that chiasm fits within all of these other, and it's all making the same argument. All of it is making the same argument, which is why I go, yes, because whatever this parallelism is, whatever this chiastic structure that Paul's using, it keeps reinforcing what Paul is saying he's up to in the book. So I am here for it.
There's only one
Amen.
thing that would make this better, Brian, and I'm going to teach you right now. You go up to File, you go up to Page Setup, and you go Pageless, and you say, okay. And now your text is not broken in the middle of your elements.
Awesome.
Deep sigh. Deep sigh.
I will not stop preaching the gospel of the pageless format, Marty.
Amen. I love it. Yeah. Just if I can add one more thing, that beautiful inclusio in Romans, which I think is between 1:5 and 6 and 16:26, is emphasizing so that all the Gentiles might come to the obedience that comes from faithfulness.
Yes.
That is the inclusio. All this.
It is. It's the bookends of the inclusio, and what we're talking about is literally the obedience of faith. Because that's a weird concept. Like, we're reading, we're like, oh, that sounds like good spiritual language. That is not a term that appears anywhere else. What is the obedience of faith? What does faith look like when it's being obedient? And for Paul, in this context, faith produces the obedience of loving Jew and Gentile, creating a new humanity, a new community, Jew and Gentile together. That is what trusting the story, the obedience of trusting the story looks like, is that inclusion between Jew and Gentile.
The word for obedience is hypokao, which is the Greek word that's almost always used for Shema. As Jewish Rabbi Shema would always be saying, this is always about hearing and doing and walking faithfully. It's always about the law.
Golly. Which is why he remezes the daylights out of the book of Romans. Because he's trying to get, well, if it's a Jewish audience, he's trying to get them to really hear the prophets, hear those remezes, because he needs them to live out their calling. Absolutely. I love it. Okay. I'm here for it. Brian, that was fun. And Brian may have facilitated the first live stream that I have ever facilitated, where we got done before the top of the hour. It is 9:59.
Amen.
Well, that's fun. Oh, there we go. Got it. Yes. All right. Well, everybody, that was great, Brian. Again, I just really appreciate you being here. That was a ton of fun. We'll do it again. I'll keep stockpiling chiasm questions that come in, and when I get enough of them, when I get 6 or 7 of them, I'll bug Brian and say, it's time. Get your Google Doc ready. Get your color highlighters going. Let's do it.
Love it.
But our next Q&A, remember, is January 8th at the normal time. That's a Wednesday, January 8th. No December live stream. We have no December live stream. Check the news page at BayMotherDiscipleship.com for any updates. Anything else, Brent? Anything else you're going to add to that?
Pray for Marty's eye surgery.
Amen.
I'm out of eyes after this. This is my second corneal cross-linking surgery, and I have no more eyes that they can work on. So hopefully I'm all done.
First one went well, right?
First one went well. Well, it wasn't fun, but it went well, and now I know what to expect, so it won't be as bad.
All right, there
That
you go.
first one was a doozy. I wish I had more eyes so I could really enjoy the fact that I'm getting used to it, but oh well.
Yeah, you're gonna have to turn to some biblical creatures for that setup.
Yeah, no kidding. Come on, Ezekiel.
The creature from Ezekiel walks into the eye doctor and they're just salivating.
Yeah,
Like, oh, this is gonna be good.
They'll make some money on that guy. Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us, everyone.
Talk to you later.